Hi, everybody. I'm so excited for our conversation today. I'm going to be talking with Charles Catchings, the Mind Barber of the Barbershop Group. And I'm going to wait for him to join me and then we'll start the discussion. How's everybody doing while we're waiting for him to join? I hope everybody's doing okay. All right, there he is. All right, so we're waiting for him to join. I'm so excited everybody's joining today. Oh, Munir. Hey, Salam. There you
Hey,
are.
hey, how are you? How are you?
Good. How are you, Charles?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good. I'm so glad we're able to schedule this and talk about such an amazing topic today.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think I'm ready.
All right. So let me just get my notes out. How are you doing this evening?
Not too bad. It's snowing here again, but there's not too many places for me to go, so it's just like okay, snow in April. um,
Oh my goodness. Remind everybody or tell everybody where you are right now.
so I'm in Michigan right now, right outside of Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, just south of Detroit, and gosh, about 15 minutes from the Canadian border, 4 hours from Niagara Falls, and all of that. So
Okay.
all the weather that they get, we get. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
uh,
Lots of snow then.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Right. Okay. Well, you're inside and staying warm, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So thank you so much for joining me this evening. I wanted to introduce everybody to Charles. Charles is an addictions counselor and intake specialist with 12 years of addictions counseling experience. He works primarily with the prison population, men re-entering society, and residential clients facing life-threatening consequences. He is a mental health advocate who shares his personal story with others in an effort to promote healing and resilience through his work with the Barbershop Group, a nonprofit organization focused on the mental, spiritual, physical, financial, and social needs of men. An absolutely amazing organization that I'm so honored to be a part of. And it really is truly amazing what you've done here. It's really like a pioneer movement, for men, a really comfortable place for men, or we hope would be comfortable for them to
Right,
kind of turn to, right? And
right,
that's
right.
uh, that's what we're talking about this evening.
Yeah.
So let's get started. Tell everyone about the Barbershop Group.
Well, the Barbershop Group, as you said, is this entity that developed over a number of years. Kind of started out in 2008, just doing some touch and go stuff within the community. And what I realized working in a residential treatment environment was that there were a lot of direct care workers who had the same experiences as the clients. Okay.
Hmm.
And the typical model of psychotherapy that was being applied at that treatment facility um, didn't really allow a connection between the direct care worker and the client. And
Hmm.
so, we started going around to barbershops, churches, mosques, anywhere that people would have us just to talk about mental health issues generally and to talk about family issues more broadly. So it was a little bit of addiction stuff. It was a little bit of anxiety, right? Not too heavy. And
Hmm.
it was also some things about domestic abuse and different things that were happening in families that were impacting people.
Yeah.
And so, one of the other things I will point out too is that one of my colleagues was working as a dean at a local law school. And he found that though he had a lot of minorities going to attending that law school, they also had some of the same issues that my clients had. And those issues were kind of keeping them from excelling at the rate that they wanted to excel. So that's really what got it started.
Okay.
Um, and then after that, about 2011, I went through this thing on one particular job where the way that I was practicing group therapy and things like that, they didn't like it. I was connecting too much with the clients for
Hmm.
what the typical model was used to. and they let me go. And at that point, it was kind of like a kick in the butt to start doing something different that I knew was going to work for people who either look like me or kind of look like me, but didn't look like the status quo. And so
Yeah.
that's how the Barbershop Group got started.
Yeah, it was a need. It was something that was really needed, and people were not for it. They weren't allowing space for it, it sounds
Right,
like.
right. Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
So what are the goals and the mission of the Barbershop Group so that,
Yes,
our audience understands a bit more about it?
absolutely. Well, you know, it's I hate to like just put it all out there in a way and people go, well, what is that? But what we try to do is we try to use media to help create safe spaces, not just online, but physical spaces where men can talk about the different issues that they might be facing in their lives.
Hmm.
I'm also careful about using the word safe too much because I don't want people to think that, okay, it's an enabling space where we don't actually have a give and take and talk about real issues and difficulties that men have been proponents of and also victims of, right?
Ah,
Um,
hmm.
but one of the things that we really focus on outside of online media content is being able to have retreats and sessions in different locations around the country that
Hmm.
expose men to group therapy processes, bonding processes, give them resources to people in their respective localities so that, if they have an issue, they can explore it further with, if it's a therapist, if it's a spiritual advisor, if it's a financial consultant, whatever the case may be. We know that there are particularly five categories where men, they come and see us. When I say us at the addiction center, they come and see us and they've got issues in these five categories. It's physical, it's social, it's financial, it's mental, it's spiritual stuff. Those are the things that present the most. And so
Hmm.
when we go around, we try to do workshops that are geared towards addressing those issues.
Okay, so you're covering all the bases.
Yes.
And are men open to attending those workshops and retreats?
So it's very interesting. Sometimes they are, but to be quite honest, it's an uphill battle.
Hmm.
The people who are open to it are the people who have already committed to doing some type of self work, whether that is, it could be in any of those five categories. These
Hmm.
are the individuals who will say, you know what, hey, I'm looking at something like that. I was interested in that, or I was reading this book, or I watched this thing and I thought about that.
Hmm.
But there are still yet so many men from different walks of life who are not very comfortable attending an event like that
Yeah.
because of the different stigmas that men have had to deal with for so long.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Why don't we get into that? Like talking about those stigmas and
Yeah.
really kind of beginning the conversation of like, how do we get past all of these stigmas? I know
Yeah.
myself, as a therapist, like just facing those as well and really kind of spreading the awareness of just therapy in general. And then specifically when it comes to men, like, let's get
Yeah.
into what are those stigmas? What exists and what are the barriers for men to reach help?
I think that there are two types of stigmas that I talk about a lot. One is a collective ontological and historical stigma, and the other one is a more recent individual stigma, right? So
Mhm.
the one that's ontological and historical is that a lot of men, even going back to like Paleolithic age, right? The way things were set up was they were completely dominant.
Mhm.
They had to lead. They were hunter type of people.
Mhm.
They had to be very cliquish and clannish in order to protect themselves. And they had
Right.
to walk around with a poker face, right? It was either poker face or the other tribe is going to take your tribe out.
Sure.
Right? And,
Protection
and so,
mechanism.
yeah, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and, and so if you are within that tribe, but you don't function the way that everybody else in that tribe is functioning, all
Mhm.
right, you are possibly endangering our survival. And so we've got to decide what we want to do with you, you
Yes.
know?
Yes.
And so that's how stigma starts to develop way back then. And then when you
Mhm.
add other components to it, the religious and political that comes from way back forward. Now it's all dumped on these guys, and so they're like, okay, wait, I have to look like this, I have to sound like this, I have to
Mm-hmm.
dress like this, right? I have to
Yeah.
speak like this, and eventually you find yourself in this little tiny box. So what our ancestors did is men to survive back then isn't necessarily helping us today, and it's created a bit of a stigma, right? So
Right.
now let's talk about the stigma as it exists today. You take half of that with what we currently have in our
Mm-hmm.
modern lives, and what does it look like? It's, you know, I'm weak if I speak up,
Right.
okay? I can't go against the norms,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um,
I have to be a
there's,
man.
yeah,
Let's
how to be a
face.
man, it's this, wait, I am a man, but I'm not a woman. Is there an in between? And there are so many different societies around the world and here in America that don't allow for the the complex polarities to exist, right? You're either over
Right.
here or you over there. You can't be on the fence in the middle because that's the punkish thing to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so, oh my God, here we are again, and I'm stigmatized all over. Some
Right.
of this stigma comes directly from men who do it to each other, right? And they do it
Mm-hmm.
to each other at work, in sport, in politics. We're seeing it now in politics, right?
Yes.
Um, they do it in religious settings and whatnot. But
Right.
women also contribute to
Sure.
this stigma because I always like to say that men have a fantasy, kind of like Disney. We call it pornography, and women's fantasy is Disney. And then beyond that, we have our religious expectations. And when a man doesn't fit into a woman's expectations, now here comes another level of the stigma, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what if I'm a man, but I don't know how to fix a sink? What if I don't know how to fix a car? What if I can't put together a bike?
Yeah.
Right?
All
Or
those
what?
expectations that are put on them, right?
Yeah,
This is what it means to be a man.
right,
Yeah.
right. So these are the types of stigmas that start to develop, and we haven't even begun speaking specifically about like mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just to when you think about it, I mean, there's all type of stuff like men. You've watched the TV shows, and even maybe you know somebody. If you're taking a trip and a man doesn't know the directions to a place, he doesn't want to stop and ask, right? Okay, he doesn't want to call a friend to ask for advice. You know, if it's running a business,
Self-sufficiency, right?
self-sufficiency. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Now, so a lot of men think it's self-sufficiency, but then if they were to start getting into a clinical session, then maybe it would be called something else, self-reliance, and it's always not the greatest thing. But
Yeah.
when it comes to physical illness, mental illness, sexual issues, men definitely shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a whole lot of stigmas that are not really helpful and conducive to getting the help that people need.
Right, right. Something that you said earlier about um, how, there's these expectations that are put on men and all of these shoulds and woulds and coulds, right? Like I should know how to, get from one place to the other,
Yeah.
or I'm supposed to be, right? The supposed to's. I'm supposed to be like this,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so what that does is, like you said, it puts them in that box and they're supposed to kind of fit that.
Right.
And then when it comes to mental health, it's really a lot of it is about stepping into your own personal power, putting away the shoulds and the coulds and supposed to be's, right?
Right.
And like writing your own story and
Right.
being whoever you are. And so, do you find that men in particular have a tough time doing that? Like letting go of the I'm supposed to be like this and
Yeah.
really kind of creating their own story of who they are.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, and some of that, it's a very complex conversation, and
Mhm.
I'll try to touch on a couple points within that. You know, it can be very, very difficult to look at oneself individually, right? When you've been paying so much attention to the collective. You
Mhm.
know, when I start talking to men about therapy and psychology, there are so many men who want to go the route of social psychology and
Mhm.
include the whole, or talk about activism and include the whole.
Right.
If you ask them to speak on an individual level, it's like, some of them actually feel picked on. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I like to bring to the fore today in our conversation and regarding men is there are a couple things that I think we should be looking at, and that's number one is decolonizing what therapy looks like and sounds like for men. So
Mm-hmm.
there's that ethnic, racial, cultural piece,
Right.
but also it's not a word, but I'm going to use it. Degendering what psychotherapy looks like as well.
Okay.
Okay, yeah,
Mm-hmm. We can
because
make that a word.
yeah, we can make that a word because I think that like to really get men to think about it individually, they have to feel okay, um, kind of like attaching it to something that they're familiar with and can understand. We have to be able to kind of meet them where they are, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and then walk with them to wherever they're going, wherever
Sure.
they're going.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, and it kind of goes back to the stigma thing. When they look at psychology and counseling today, they see it being very white, very feminine. And so it's like, oh my God, I'm a man. I've been dealing with the collective for so long. And now how do I make the switch?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
there's some things that we can do to help men make the switch, but it does take some time.
Mm-hmm. So
Okay.
what are those things that we can do?
Well, we have to be willing to look at the language that we use,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of decide as counselors, therapists, and alike. We have to be open to deciding when the language doesn't work for men,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have to think about new modes of therapy that work for men.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having a man come in and let me go backward. He calls, he needs some help with an issue. A lady answers the phone. It's got soft music playing as he's on hold. He makes an appointment. He gets there. The reception room is decked out with flowers and vases and all types of art, right? That's really kind of to the feminine side. And he's like, okay, wait a minute. Most of the magazines there are feminine, focusing on women, and it doesn't create this vibe. And what I say to a lot of people is if you want to reach men, you don't even have to reach men in the confines of four walls with flowers and vases and pictures and all that stuff. You can take them to a wood shop and they're going to respond. You can
Yeah.
take them on a fishing trip. They're going to respond. Take them camping. They will
Mm-hmm.
respond. As much as some people don't like to talk about hunting, take men, if they have experience, take them hunting. Men open
Mm-hmm.
up. These are therapeutic activities for men,
Sure.
right?
Outside of the therapy room.
Outside of the therapy
Yeah.
room, right? I look at it like this. If we're going to do play therapy for kids, right? And kids play outside of therapy, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with reaching men, with therapeutic applications in an environment that they normally are active in.
Sure. Yeah.
You see? So maybe that's going to be having 4 or 5 guys in the garage as they are working on a car and just
Mm-hmm.
talking about random issues.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in talking about those random issues, being very conscious about the language that we are using. So
Yeah.
instead of getting somebody to talk about vulnerability, right? We're talking about, hey Mo, you know what? That sounds like an opportunity, man. Like, what do you think about that? How would you go about fixing that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
You see, fix, because why? We know men love fixing stuff, and that's what we
Fixers.
look for. That's what we look for.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so as soon as a man hears vulnerability, unless he's done a lot of self work, he's like, back it up, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But a man hears the opportunity all the time,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Because
Yeah.
when he goes on his 9 to 5, his boss is talking about opportunities, right? So that's one way. Another way that we can reach men with probably higher, and I see that. How can we help our boys in this sense as well? And I'll try to answer that, okay, in a minute. Just
Great
remind me.
question. Mm-hmm.
One of the other things that we can do is this: speak to men in the context of leadership. Okay. Um, and that's a difficult thing
Mhm.
because what you heard me say that psychology has been it's been Eurocentric, very white, and it's been gendered over the last maybe 40, 50 years now. Okay.
Sure.
Not necessarily a bad thing. Kudos to women who got involved because women were excluded for a long time from
Yeah.
psychotherapy.
Right.
Women were studied as problem children and not contributing to the field. So
Mhm.
now women are contributing to the field, but they're
We're
contributing
taking
so
over.
much. Yeah, they're taking over. Um, but they're also taking over because there are a lot of men out there who actually work in the field who still aren't speaking up like me,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
So so the thing to do is look at mental health in the context of leadership. And one of the reasons why I say that to people is because like you can't be a good leader if you're not a good communicator. And you can't be a good communicator with others unless you know what's happening with yourself.
Mhm.
Okay, so it goes back to this old adage of know thyself, right? But if we talk to them that way, then we'll start to kind of get some juices turning. In order to do that, we've got to have the power brokers in psychotherapy currently change the language that they're using. And a lot of people, a lot of women don't necessarily feel comfortable talking to a man about leadership today in the context of mental health because we are putting forth women's empowerment so much. It's like, wait, if I talk to a man about leadership, am I paying disservice? Am I doing a disservice to the women who are leaders? No, you're not doing a disservice to the women who are leaders. But if you want these men to get better, you got to talk to them where they are.
Yeah, you got to speak to them. Yeah, in
Right,
every sense of the phrase. Yeah,
right,
you got to reach to them,
right.
get into their minds and what they're thinking about and what
Yeah,
really helps them.
yeah.
Yeah. So how
So,
can we do this in the therapy room in the sense of
mhm,
inviting men to reach out for therapy? I mean, it's
yeah.
amazing that there's the Barbershop Group and you're doing these workshops and retreats and, reaching men where they are,
Hmm.
but there's still that need for therapy, right? That individual
Right.
therapy for men
Absolutely.
to reach out to.
Yeah.
So what would you say, as a collective for us
Um,
to help men to reach out for therapy?
okay. So here are a couple things. One thing is the typical therapeutic model that's being used um, doesn't always address practical solutions for men. Let me try to explain for some of the viewers out there. The unlike I'm an addictions counselor. I don't have to speak with a client and kind of have a client go through a couple weeks of thinking and another month of and kind of let them discover some stuff. A lot of the clients that I see they're just out of incarceration. They have points on their licenses.
Hmm.
They're probably getting ready to go into a longer term treatment environment. They have harmed people physically. So we're talking about dangerous situations. If
Yeah.
I don't say to this guy, hey, look, you know what? Here's an opportunity for you to change right now, but you've got to make a decision. We've got about 10 minutes to think about this. You've
Yeah.
hurt your daughter. Your wife is in the other room crying now, okay? You're stealing from your parents. You just got out of the hospital. Let me tell you what's going to happen to you now. We need to make a decision. You see? And
Yeah.
somebody says sugarcoating, straight to the point ideas. Yes, absolutely, you're right.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
that's the way I have to approach men in addictions. A
Right.
lot of therapists, because they have looked at it from a different perspective, they don't necessarily give that type of advice and guidance to men, right? Because
Hmm.
it went against the Euro idea.
Yeah.
Okay,
But it
so
sounds like, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it sounds like those therapists aren't kind of reaching beyond their own way of doing things, right?
right,
Whereas as a therapist, I got to find out where my client is at, right? And
yeah,
reach them or meet them where they are and what works for them, right?
right,
So I may
right,
take weeks and months for somebody who's into more reflection and self-awareness and looking
right,
deep within themselves. But if I have somebody sitting in front of me who's like, I need tangibles, like I need solutions right
Yeah.
away, like I need specific, steps to kind of
Hmm.
get where I want to go,
Right.
then I meet the client where they're at and kind of
Yeah.
help them through that.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's why, on my personal pages, I use a lot of bullet point stuff. It'll
Yeah.
be like, here's the topic. So
Mm-hmm.
relationships are this. And then here are the three things and maybe one sentence. And I'm going to let you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see what
I
I'm saying?
love those. Yeah.
Because I know that we men, we're not going to be processing paragraph after paragraph, video after video, and taking it back and pulling out a journal and doing all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
That's a long way off for the typical male. You see,
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we need to do inside of the four walls. Another thing
Yeah.
that we need to do, yeah, she said that's where people end up leaving therapy. Yeah, a lot of them
Mm-hmm.
do.
Yeah.
Another thing that we have to do for men is we have to be unafraid of holding men accountable. So I think we're at a place where we're doing a fairly good job of speaking to the victim who is male.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think we kind of understand that some things happen to guys and it's made them feel a certain way and they've got pain and hurting and agony inside. Yes,
Yeah.
this is true.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, and again, I have the luxury of saying this because of where I sit, we've got to be able to hold these individuals accountable too. So when he comes into the room, I understand that this happened and I'm not sorry, but you know what? My empathy goes to you because of this thing that happened to you. It sounds like it left a lasting impression. Can you tell me more about it? There's that. But
Mm-hmm.
in tell me more about it, what I'm also looking for is who else did you hurt, right?
Yeah.
How did what happened to you and the fact that you didn't seek any assistance and guidance, how did that impact the other people in your life? What did you do?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
what was some of the after effects, right? What was some of the blowback of not addressing this issue at that time? So there's that accountability thing
Right.
that we have to do better with as well. Because I think a lot of times when people hear men's mental health today, it actually turns some folks off because, yeah, hurt people because, hey, you know what? You need to follow me. Asma, yes. Make sure you follow the mind bar.
I'm sure everybody will
Okay.
after this talk, Charles.
So, so one of the
Everybody
things
needs to follow you.
that we see happening is there's this propensity to, reach the man, and everybody's open to the man who's hurting. Yes, okay, but we also have to reach the man who has hurt people, and that's where it gets really uncomfortable.
Yes,
You
yeah, very.
as you know, I started off working with juvenile sex offenders, so I was thrown in a fire with people who was hurting people.
Oh,
you know
yeah, yeah,
you see what I'm saying? And
yeah.
what I realized was that, wow, you're hurting people because you've been hurt. You never got help,
Mhm.
and it just spread.
Yeah.
So there's that. I talked about practical solutions. That's where we are. I like to use the example of AutoZone,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and cars.
Mm-hmm.
Something that someone who knows a lot about cars, okay.
Yes.
So if I go to AutoZone, something's wrong with my car. It's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And I go to AutoZone and I tell the clerk, hey, listen, this is what's wrong with my car. I need this particular part to get this car back working. And the clerk gives me a part for the car, but it's an experimental part, or it might work, right? And I take that and I try it on the car and it doesn't work. Now I got to go back to AutoZone and I
Mm-hmm.
have to get another part from that clerk. I'm hey, that one didn't work. I need another one. Okay.
Yeah.
And I go and I took that and I put that in my car and it doesn't work. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have to go back to AutoZone and try. So this clerk is doing their job. They're assisting me, but they aren't giving me what's really needed to get my car back on the road.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of have to look at therapy for men and mental health for men that same way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When he shows up at the office, this guy's paying $100, $80, $150. He's not wanting to pay for a car part every time he comes to see you, and that car part doesn't get his car back running.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you,
Great example. Yeah. He
you
wants
see?
the part that's going to work
Yeah.
right away.
He wants that, he wants that's going to work. Now, let me say this. give him the part that's going to work. Let him drive that car. And maybe in driving that car, he figures out, oh, you know what? Maybe there's something else wrong with this car. Maybe I need to go back and give me another part. That's the part that he has to experience.
Yes. Yes.
But on the therapeutic end, we've got to give him the part that he needs right then. Okay? Because if not, we'll lose them. And I'll give another example. There are so many men who go see a therapist, go see a counselor, go see someone, and then they die by suicide right after they've seen somebody, right? Because we think we have time. We're trying the typical approaches, not realizing that the man is using a coded language that's saying, I'm very unsafe. I need it fixed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So that's what we kind of have to do.
And sometimes that comes to mind is that so many men are holding so much in, right?
Right.
And then when they finally reach out for help and they go in, now all of this is kind of coming out, right? All of
Right.
this pain and everything that they've gone through is coming out. So the therapist needs to keep that in mind and not to, let everything out and have him just go home with all of that out now. Right?
Right.
Giving him like a safe container, even mentally, emotionally, to really close that all back up again until that next session, right? To be able to process it together. Like you're here, you came for help, you don't have to do this alone anymore. And if you leave, whether it's men or women, if you leave the client, right? I know this from just the working with trauma. If you kind of leave them with everything open up now, it's just too much for them when they go back and they're sitting with their thoughts.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that can happen too, is they've been holding it in for so long, holding it together, and now finally kind of opening up about it. It's just too much.
Right. Yeah. No doubt about that. You're very right about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So someone asked a question. They asked a question about boys. How do we do this? How do we do this for boys? And I want to be sure that I got the question right. So if you're still watching, if I didn't get it, just send another message. But I want to try to talk about this.
I can also scroll up. It's
okay.
It's how can we help our boys in this sense as well?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm glad that was asked because, Sadia, I talked to you offline, and one of the things that I try not to do too much is I try not to carve up all of society and carve up all of humanity. And I think that what applies to men applies to boys. In fact, I argue that today we actually need to do more of this with our boys than we're necessarily doing with middle-aged men.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why. Yeah, there's a reason why. I think that younger people are going to be more receptive to this than somebody who has been going on their way for so long and now, old dog, new trick. Yeah, right. I'm not doing it. Okay. But, when you look at boys, first of all, we have to look at how we're speaking to boys. Okay. How we're hearing boys, more importantly. I need everybody to understand that something very, very interesting has happened for young boys, especially in America. Okay. A lot of boys are now behind girls in school, and they're trying to figure out why. And, when you start looking at things now, you don't have a lot of male teachers and male role models in the schools anymore. Okay. Depending on where you are, in what city you're in, and what socioeconomic bracket you're in, you may not have male role models at home. Okay.
Right.
You may not have male role models in your religious institutions who are open, right? Who are open to discussing opportunities and things like that. So you go, oh my gosh. So let me go backward. We need them.
Yes.
We need men in religious institutions to be very candid, be very open, and practice a type of radical honesty.
Right.
Okay. We need more male role models in schools today. Okay.
Absolutely.
We have to amplify the voices of those men who are in schools who are doing a good job with children,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need to take a look at our family environments and look at the men in our families who are healthy and who can contribute to the lives of our sons, right? Whether they're uncles, cousins, and things like that. We
Yes.
need to really,
Mm-hmm.
really kind of rebuild our villages.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to
Mm-hmm.
rebuild our villages. And we also have to be careful about the messaging that we're sending to boys. For a long time, we've been sending messages to boys that, say, you're you aren't listening to me. Okay, especially boys aren't listening to girls, and we
Mm-hmm.
got that message. Boys aren't listening to girls. And somewhere along the line, we were talking about boys not listening to girls so long, we forgot to hear the boys.
Mm-hmm.
We forgot to hear the boys. You
Yeah.
see what I'm saying?
They become silenced.
They
Yeah.
become silenced. They become silenced. All
And they
right.
lose their voice.
So they lose their voice. We also have to look at what our expectational goals are for these men and these boys. The way that the male role model relates to the boy is going to be different a lot of times, right? So one of the things that I talked about a while ago is there's this idea that roughhousing with a young boy is somehow toxic, but believe it or not, a father roughhousing with a young boy is actually helping that boy develop emotional intelligence. And they say, well,
Mm-hmm.
how? That boy who wrestles with his father is learning what is real and what is fake. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He's learning something about boundaries. All right.
Yeah.
He's learning how to say, okay, wait a minute, that was safe. This was unsafe.
Yeah. There's
Okay.
so much in that connection, right? In that moment of connection with his father.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a connection there. You see what I'm saying? So I
Yeah.
like to, as creepy as it makes it, as it sounds like to people, when a father is wrestling with a son, I want to also get women to think about when a mother is nursing her child. That's the
Mm-hmm.
type of connecting that takes place between men and boys. But
Yes.
nobody talks about that.
Right.
You
Right.
see? So
Mm-hmm.
so these are some things that we need to be looking at. When we talk about messaging, we have to be sure that we are not shutting boys out and shutting them down because we're trying to amplify other voices. You
Mm-hmm.
see, um, boys are not going to communicate the way that, if you're a mother, a boy isn't necessarily going to communicate with you the way that you want him to or expect him to, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Boys need a lot more space and a lot more time typically in order to kind of deal with some stuff. And even when they come to you and speak to you, it may be something real short like, hey, mom, well, I was just upset about something Tyler did, but it's okay now. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, as a mother, you're like, hold up. That doesn't,
I
what
need
you
more
mean?
details. Give me more details. Yeah. Give me some emotions.
Right. You're thinking like, I gotta have more than that. And he's like, no, it's okay now. It's fixed. Okay.
Mhm.
And if you just sit with that and say, okay, you know what? I'm glad that it worked out. If you have anything else go on, or if you need to talk about it a little more,
Yeah.
just, you know what, leave me a note, or you know, I'll ask you a question, or maybe you can ask me a question. And that's just kind of how it goes. You
Yeah,
see,
exactly. Yeah.
you
It's
know,
it's really knowing their way of connecting, right?
yes.
It's
So
it can be completely different than
yes,
other kids. Yeah.
right. Asma said, when the boys talk, I'm listening, they barely talk. That's okay.
Yeah.
Because remember that talking is just one form of communication,
Right.
right?
It could be
You just,
actions.
so the fact that your son is just standing in front of you or in the same room with you,
Hmm.
sitting next to you, looking across from you, making eye contact with you, that's a big deal
Yes.
because he could actually go run and hide underneath the bed or in the closet or go away from you. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So
Hmm.
though the language piece is, again, that's something that, like I said, we expect that from like a woman to sit down with us and talk to us like that. right?
Mm-hmm.
And that give and take. And it's probably verbal, but there's a lot of nonverbal stuff that we don't address. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
And,
lot.
yeah, and even like just personal experience having, I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. So the way that I connect with each of them is different, right? Where my daughter, I can sit down and have this long conversation with, and we can really
Yeah.
talk about feelings and we're crying and those kinds of things. My son, connecting with him is playing Monopoly on his Nintendo Switch
Yeah.
and also ping pong and
Mhm.
going outside and riding bikes together. So it's
Yeah.
really knowing the different way for each one to kind of connect. It may
Right.
not be verbal, like you said, it could
Right.
definitely be in different ways. And I love
Yeah.
what you said about, as you know, he's in the same room with you, he's, you know, he's not hiding or completely cutting off from you, that's a good sign. Whereas
Yeah.
a lot of times parents are like looking for something deeper,
Right.
right? But
Yeah.
recognizing, meet them where they are.
Right.
Goes back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hmm.
And so I know that Instagram usually cuts us off after an hour. So we have about 10 minutes. It would be nice to have any more questions answered. We have such an amazing resource here. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You can use the questions tab and I can bring those questions up on the screen. But a question that I have for you would be, what advice do you give to men who are experiencing mental health issues, like just challenges, like maybe a sadness and a type of depression is coming up, or, they recognize they have an addiction, or they're facing a lot of anxiety or relationship issues? Like, what advice would you give them?
So one of the first things that I tell men is to write down 5 people that they have in their life that they trust. 5 people,
Mm,
right? Write 5. If you can't write 5, write 3. Okay. And take one issue. Take one issue and go to that person. Okay. And tell them, hey, listen, this is this is going to sound really crazy, but it's like, hey, man, listen, I know you're a little bit busy, but I thought of you today and I just wanted to reach out and see how you were doing.
mm,
Totally a trick thing. Totally a trick thing. But what you're doing is you're kind of trying to assess how this person responds to you so that you can open up and talk about the issue. Right? You
mhm.
don't want to emotionally dump on somebody, but at the same time, you want to be able to address something that's really, really hectic in your life. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's,
Mhm.
hey man, listen, give me a call later on the day. I was going through something, man. I just kind of want to bounce some stuff off of you. Right?
Mhm.
Start there. You don't have to call a therapist right away. If you don't feel like it. Now, if you feel like you're unsafe, dial 911. Don't. I'm not even
Right.
going to play around with that. But
Yeah.
your first step may not be calling a therapist. It may be calling
Mhm.
a trusted friend, a trusted relative. And again, you don't have to throw everything out at the same person. You can
Yeah.
do a little bit here because it's also a test for you to see if you're really ready to talk about the issue. Because
Yeah.
one of the things that I find that happens, Saudi, is a lot of men will have an issue going on, but because they haven't really talked to themselves about it, when they begin to talk to someone else, they only give like that much of it, but they want that much information back,
Yeah.
and you can't do it, right?
Mhm.
You can't
Mhm.
do it. So that's one of the first things. The second thing, obviously, is if you're in a religious community, spiritual community that you trust, and you have knowledgeable people among you, reach out to them, ask for a consultation in a private moment with them,
Mhm.
okay, to talk about an issue. And I realize some people don't have that,
Yeah.
okay? If you do not have that available to you, then there are a lot of anonymous call lines available to you where you can call and get some assistance right there on the spot. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be obviously somebody who knows you.
Mhm.
Okay. Those are some things that you can do that include other people. From an individual standpoint, when you're alone, there is, and I say prayer, but I'm going to just say talking to God. Okay.
Mhm.
Whether that is going through your religious uh, uh, um, requirements and getting ready for prayer, if that's what you need to do, fine. Or if you're just like, you know what, God, I'm in trouble, help me now. Whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
if you have that framework, if that's a foundation for you, use it
Mhm.
because it's helpful, right?
Right.
And whether it's a prayer is not just for God, it's also for us. It's for us to hear ourselves, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that can kind of help us get to the next bridge where maybe I do write down something to talk to somebody about, you know, or I
Mm-hmm.
do call a therapist. And I tell people all the time, you don't necessarily have to journal, but you know what? Just write a word in your phone that stood out to you that day, you know,
Yeah.
or if it's a picture that resonated with you, do something that kind of starts to jar your mind to help you wake up and realize, you know what? I've got to go and talk to someone about this in order to get help. I can't process it by myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you so much. So there's a question here. Are there any organizations or clubs that young boys can join to bond with others and help them?
Okay. So, gosh,
I
uh,
know. I wish there were more, right?
yeah, years ago, I would have said, you know, I mean, there's still obviously things like scouting and other things, and they've got some issues that they're working on now.
Yeah.
But you know, one of the things that I always say to people is don't get caught up looking for these organizations. If you don't find them, create them. There's an opportunity.
Mm, yes.
Okay. And those organizations aren't necessarily or don't always have to look like what they looked like years ago. Sometimes
Hmm.
that organization may look like a chess club. Sometimes it may look like a video game club on Twitch, right? You know, sometimes it's going to be a messenger group for boys or what have you, you know, because
Hmm.
it's a different technological age for
Right.
folks, right?
Mhm.
But they're not going to be they're not going to be you know, a lot of organizations specifically that are out there for boys that are national. There'll be some local,
Hmm.
okay, that are doing some work, but you'll find once you see those organizations, you'll see that you don't have enough mentors involved. You don't have enough parents involved. And
Yeah.
that's why I say, if you ask that question, be ready to get involved.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay?
So here's another question. What do you suggest for men to open up to their partners and be vulnerable? It's a great.
Um, it is a good question, but I'm going to flip it. And
All
I'm
right.
going to say, um, what are partners willing to do for men to become open and vulnerable to them?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
What can
because
you do to invite
what can you do
invite
to
that
invite? Yeah,
vulnerability?
because you know, I can say to a man all day long, you know, you need to tell your partner about this, or man, why don't you sit down and talk to her about this, or whatever. But I don't know the personality that that other individual has. I don't know if they're
Yeah.
abrasive. I don't know if they're
Mhm.
cold. I don't know if they're nurturing and warm. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I don't know their history to even know if something has happened that prevents her from being open to his vulnerability. We don't
Mhm.
know. So
Yeah.
and so on the one hand, we talk to men about living an authentic way, but on the other hand, he can be 100% authentic. If she's not receptive, then you know what? His authenticity, it doesn't matter. It's not, at least
Exactly.
if he's looking to connect. So what we have found, especially in addictions counseling, is a lot of times, a lot of men have been very vulnerable with their
Mhm.
partners, and their partners have been abrasive, actually. And this is in
Mhm.
heterosexual couples and gay couples as well.
Mhm.
So you see, yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's what we do in couples therapy too. It's like it's not just one-sided, right? It's not his
Right,
unwillingness to be vulnerable, but what
right,
is he facing on the other side when he finally does choose to be vulnerable, right?
right,
How is
right,
he being received? How is he being, invited to be vulnerable? What is the
right,
response that he's getting?
right.
So
Yeah.
that's a great question. I like how you flipped that there.
Mhm.
All right. So, do we have any more questions? Let me look at the question tab because I know we're running on just a few more minutes left. Okay. So, Charles, why don't you let people know how to get in touch with you, how to connect with you? I know this was such an amazing talk, and we really just touched on men's mental health, and we've got to do another one of these. But basically, letting people know how to be in touch with you and how to maybe get involved with the barbershop group or
Mhm.
how to stay in touch.
Okay, so definitely you can follow the Barbershop Group on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. It's very important that you follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well, because we put out a lot of articles about men's mental health and everything else that we talked about today. A slew of articles, probably 200-300 articles in a week. Okay. But you can also follow us, like I said, on Instagram. If you want to follow me personally, you can follow me here on Instagram at The Mind Barber. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn as well. So just send me a message if you have trouble. You know, if you want to get involved with the Barbershop Group, you can email us at info@thebarbershopgroup.org or use any of the social media links for the Barbershop Group. You know, we're always looking for guests to be on the show. We have a podcast that we do, and we're currently trying to diversify our podcast and include women in some of our more women in some of our presentations and talk shows and things like that. If you know somebody who's interested in talking and can deliver a message, hey, we're all for it, right? So that's the way that you can reach us.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Do you have any last final reflections on men's mental health, a message that you want to give to our audience who's listening as we finish up for today?
So I did bring a book that I want to share with everybody. They may want to take a look at, you know, this, if you can see it, right? This book here,
Real
okay, Real
Boys.
Boys. Yep, Real Boys by William Pollock. Okay, get your hands on that book.
Absolutely.
It'll lead you to some other books. Okay, and just a very informative piece of information. It's got a lot of research and data in there, as well as like applied therapy practice stuff in there. So it's very different than what you see in like pop culture types of stuff, so types of settings. So take a look at it. But that's it.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. I'm thinking of also the book. It is Dr. Leonard Sachs. He wrote about Boys Adrift. And right. And he also has Girls on Edge. So are you familiar with his work also?
Yes.
Yeah. So he really talks about what's going on with our boys today and how to really help them and really be present with them.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. Everyone enjoyed this talk, and I'm sure there's so many more questions and conversations that they're looking forward to have with you, Charles. And we've got to do this again and talk more and deeper about this topic that really not many people focus on. And so it's important. It's important for us to talk about this again. Thank you so much again, and take care. Have a good night and have a good weekend. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for being involved.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Take care. Salam.
Walaikum salam.